Thank you very much. So I will try to be brief. I know it was a very long day for you. So it's really to give you an overview. We have heard a lot of reporting of medication errors, but what is also important to us, of course, is then to have a mechanism in order to capture this information correctly, to find a common terminology on how we can describe these medication errors, and then also to use this information to monitor really what's going on and to take the appropriate actions. So in my talk, I will give you a very brief overview of MedDRA, why we are going to use it, and then to focus a little bit on the guidance that has been worked on by the MedDRA Points to Consider group, which is quite important for people like colleagues in pharmaceutical industry or colleagues at the regulatory authorities in order to process this information correctly. And then to conclude our overview really with some statistics on EudraVigilance and medication errors. So MedDRA was introduced in the context of ICH. ICH is the International Conference of Harmonization of Technical Requirements for Registration of Pharmaceuticals for Human Use. And this is quite an important initiative because we are trying really to harmonize our activities in the pharmaceutical domain, not only across the European Union, but really with our main stakeholders at the level of the US, but also of Japan. And we are working also with observers like, for instance, WHO on an international level on various activities. And one of the key areas here is to develop a common medical terminology that facilitates our work in pharmacovigilance. And the reason why this is very important, specifically in the area of pharmacovigilance, is because you have seen from Thomas's presentation, we are not only looking on pharmacovigilance data within the European Union, but really trying to collect information for products worldwide in order to have the best overview of the safety and the benefits, but also the risks of medicines. And in order to achieve that at an international level, it's important that we speak the common language, and MedDRA is one of the tools in order to help us to achieve that. So MedDRA is overseen by MedDRA Maintenance and Support Service Organization. So they are helping us to maintain the information. And we have a governance structure there, which is the ICH MedDRA Management Board, where again, we have the different regulators, but also the representatives from pharmaceutical industry represented to take management decisions on how we further develop this terminology. So I've already mentioned MedDRA is for us really a clinically validated international medical terminology. And as I mentioned, it is used by regulatory authorities and also the regulated pharmaceutical industry. What is also important is that we are applying now MedDRA consistently through the whole life cycle of the medicinal product. So from the clinical trial phase, during development, and then the authorization and post-marketing, we have a possibility now to capture the data in a standardized way. So this is just to explain to you the scope of MedDRA, what is included in the terminology and what is outside the terminology, what is not addressed. So I will not go into the details, but what is important for us is that MedDRA also covers the area of medication errors, and that's the purpose of our discussions today. So from the benefits of MedDRA, it is really important for us that we have the whole spectrum of the activities supported through this terminology, and that refers to coding, data retrieval, data presentation, the analysis of the data, but also communication. And for instance, if we talk about the SMPC, adverse reactions which are known, for instance, for medicinal products, are listed and classified in accordance with the MedDRA terminology. So this is just to give you an overview how MedDRA is organized. It's a hierarchical terminology. I will not go into the level of details. We have 26 different system organ classes, which are then further refined in lower levels, which help us again in the data analysis and in the data coding. And just to show you, the medication error terms are grouped under the system organ class injury, poisoning, and procedural complications. And in the high-level group term, then you will find its own class for medication errors. So I have pointed out that in the context of ICH, we have a dedicated working group, which is the so-called MedDRA points to consider working group, which develops specific guidance for coding, but also for data retrieval. And this is quite important because we receive a lot of information. But in order to make sure that we manage this information correctly, we need to have appropriate guidance on coding, and we had several examples provided already today. So what I present to you is a follow-up on what Liz has already presented in her presentation. So based on the new pharmacovigilance legislation, the MedDRA points to consider working group has looked again specifically on the guidance of coding medication errors and is now in a process of issuing further guidance, but also further examples on how to best deal with medication errors. So in the following slides, we have provided for you a little bit of an overview of this future guidance, which will be expected to be released with MedDRA version 16 in September this year. And here we are distinguishing, first of all, with medication errors reported with clinical consequences. And we have discussed that already this morning. So medication errors with clinical consequences, the coding principle is here that you code on one hand the medication error that has occurred, but also the clinical consequence. That means the adverse event or adverse reaction that has been observed in context with this medication error. So if I give you the example here that patient was administered with the wrong drug and experienced hypotension, then the coding principle would be that you code that the wrong drug has been administered, but you would also code, for instance, the adverse reaction, which was in this example, hypertension. And the same, for instance, would be if you have a drug name confusion where the patient took the wrong drug and experienced, for instance, a rash as a consequence of this wrong drug administration, you would code this as drug name confusion in the context of a medication error and then the adverse reaction that has actually occurred. We have also talked about medication errors without clinical consequences, and we have said that this would not qualify for reaction reporting or individual case safety reporting, but nevertheless, these events need to be also captured and managed from an information management perspective in your system, in your monitoring system. And again here, the MedDRA points to consider group has given clear guidance on how to record, for instance, medication errors without clinical consequences. So I will not go into the details here in the matter of time, but you will have a handout of the presentations, and you can find then the further information presented. So just to give you an example again, the medication was given intravenously instead of intramuscularly. So here the term would be intramuscular formulation administered by other route, but of course we have no adverse events, so this would not be specifically coded. We have also had mentioned earlier today in the presentations medication errors in the context of labeled interactions. And again, here the MedDRA points to consider group gives very clear guidance on how this should be handled, taking into account that we may have labeled drug-drug interactions with medication errors, labeled drug-food interactions with medication errors, labeled drug disease interaction medication errors, and for instance documented hypersensitivity to administered drugs. So again, this is important information for us in order to take preventive measures, But again, taking into account the information that we receive, we need to code it properly in order to be able then to analyze the data appropriately. And again, you will have detailed examples on how to handle these different scenarios. What is also important to take into account that we should not infer a medication error. So if it's not clearly stated by the reporter that a medication error has occurred, then we should avoid to take interpretations, but really try to reflect exactly what has been provided by the primary source. The last point is also, again, to clearly distinguish between product quality issues and medication errors. And again, in the detailed guidance, you will find examples and instructions on how you deal with these different scenarios. So last not but least, very briefly, and Thomas has already introduced the topic of medication errors that have been reported to EudraVigilance. Again, we have tried to select all the medication error terms from the MedDRA terminology. We have specifically excluded overdose terms because from a legislation perspective, we are looking at overdose terms separately as a different concept from medication errors. We have then also tried to group the medication errors that have been reported to EudraVigilance according to the 5 WHO classifications, categories: prescribing, dispensing, medicine preparation, administration, and monitoring errors. And we would like to show you a quick overview of these results as well. And also we have been looking at the most frequently medication error terms depending on the medicinal product class that has been reported to us. And again, we have used here the WHO ATC classification system. And then, of course, we have retrieved cases from the post-authorization module, including the data that Thomas has also described from the periodic reporting in the past. So this is just to give you the percentage of the medication errors that we have received by ATC classification of medicines. So we had, I think, a presentation before from Dr. O'Mahony, which showed similar trends in relation to medication errors and different medicinal product classes. And again, nervous system, alimentary tract, and metabolism medicines are mostly affected by medication errors, and that's definitely something that we should perhaps further investigate. And last not but least, just to show you, again, this is an initial analysis performed on the basis of our internal activities. We have tried to take the different medication error terms that we have currently available in the MedDRA terminology and group them according to the different WHO medication error classifications. There are certain errors that may fit in different classes, and you will see that in the overview. And again, as I mentioned, we have excluded specifically HLT overdose terms from this analysis. So this is just a very brief summary of the outcome of the initial data that we hold in EudraVigilance. So the main issues we see on medication errors refer to drug prescribing errors, drug administered to a patient of inappropriate age refers again to the example we had previously where we do not have the exact formulations, for instance, for children, and where medicines licensed for adults are frequently prescribed for the use in children. Circumstances or information capable of leading to medication errors is a quite broad definition, but again, this is very frequently reported, and product substitution issue was also mentioned as one of the potential courses that could lead to medication errors. And as you can see here, this is also one of the top 4 medication errors in relation to prescribing. If we look then into the area of dispensing, here most of the medication errors we have in the system refer, for instance, to incorrect storage of the drug. again to drug dispensing errors, and then again drug administered to patients of inappropriate age. For preparation, the main medication errors here are wrong techniques in drug usage process, or that the expired drug has still been administered to the patient. And if we look then in the area of administration, we have here incorrect dose administration, drug administration errors, and again, wrong techniques in drug usage process. And from a monitoring perspective, I think one of the key aspects which we should also further monitor, and that was also discussed during today, was very often medications are contraindicated and still prescribed and used by the patients. And I think this is something that we certainly need to further follow up. And incomplete course of vaccination is again a trend that we see, and which was also given as an example today. So with that, we would like to conclude our session on reporting, and also highlight the importance of adequate coding of the information that we receive for the purpose of monitoring what's going on with medication errors. We are working, as I said, at international level together with our other partners like FDA, with MHLW, PMDA, in order to harmonize our coding terminologies and activities in order to be able to better analyze the data, and also to exchange this information. What is also important to mention is that the MedDRA Maintenance and Support Service Organization is providing dedicated training in order to improve the quality of the information that we are receiving. And we hope that also as a result of the outcome of this workshop, we can in the future also better utilize the information that we collect in EudraVigilance to prevent medication errors in the future. Thank you.